Breakups are tough, but they're even tougher the longer you're invested in one. And even more so when everyone else around is racing down the aisle with their perfect partner and you're left suddenly stumbling back into singlehood. Does it really matter that his faith isn't the same as yours? He still has good morals. Today, my friend Marianne and I plan to answer that question as well as explore the phrase unequally yoked. Hi, y'all. I'm Brittany Bostick, and this is my friend Marianne Neufang. She is a registered dietitian, a pastor's wife, and most importantly, a great mom to two spectacular boys.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for having me, Brandy. You had me as soon as you said that my boys are spectacular. I'll do anything for you at this point.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're here and decided to join me here this morning to talk. How's life in Georgia?
Going good. I mean, COVID has rocked a lot of things that we have done, but that's okay. We're finding a new normal and it's been fantastic.
Good. I hope it's a little bit better down here in Louisiana. Yeah.
I think it has been. Life has gotten back to normal as much as it can be at this point. Yeah. So we're doing pretty good.
But we're here today. We're talking about some old things back in the past, some old flames.
All right.
Yeah. Old relationship. And can you tell me how this relationship began and how old were you when it started and, what happened?
All right. So this particular relationship we're going to talk about is the one that I had with my high school / college sweetheart. His name was Al. And we started dating when we were seniors in high school, but we'd actually known each other since probably 4th grade. We'd gone to the same elementary school together, and then went to different middle schools, and then went to the same high school together. So we'd been friends throughout high school. But our senior year of school, we had what they called open lunch, where all the seniors were allowed to leave campus to go and get food. And I happened to have the one lunch period where none of my friends were going to lunch. Man. And so I usually would just go home pretty much every day and have lunch with my mom. But one day I ran into him in the parking lot and found out that he had the same lunchtime that I did. So we started going and having lunch together, and that started our relationship. We started dating from that point. Yeah. Went to prom together, started dating, and then continued through the first 3 years of college as well.
Oh, wow. Wow. So did y'all go to the same college?
We did not. I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and he went to NC State, which they're about an hour away from each other.
Okay, that's not too far.
No, we actually had decided on our colleges before we started dating. So we never had to deal with that whole, are we going to go to the same school? Is this going to be a problem? It had always just been a part of our relationship. Yeah. We just knew we were going to be at 2 different schools. The only hard part was I did not have a car on campus. They had the lottery system to get a parking space, and I had never won that lottery. So the only way I could see him was if he came to see me, or we both went home and met kind of halfway at our house and spent time together back in our hometown.
Yeah, I remember those times. I dated someone that went to different school one time, and that was always a booger. I feel the pain there, Marianne.
Yeah, lots of phone calls, lots of conversations that way. And then you saw each other on the weekends as best you could.
And occasionally on my side, I did sport a ticket one time or two.
Oh, goodness.
A campus ticket.
There you go.
But whatever.
I was thinking plane flight. I was like, girl, I'm not buying a plane ticket for you.
No, I meant campus car ticket.
Parking ticket.
Because I was not supposed to be there, but I was, oh well. So what were some things that made this such a good relationship? You guys dated for a long time. What made this this is good? What made it seem to work?
Yeah. Well, we had been friends for such a long time beforehand that really gave us a good base for our relationship. But we also had the same morals. We just early on having the conversation of is sex going to be an issue, or, what are we going to do there? I was very firm about the fact that I wanted to wait until I was married, and he was totally on board with that. And so there was never any push outside of that. And so we just had the same moral values. I didn't have to worry about him cheating on me because that wasn't something that he would have ever done. It just wasn't part of his nature. I didn't have to worry about him lying to me. He just was a kind and very sweet kind of guy. So we were able to make our relationship work because it was very seamless. Yeah. We went from being friends to now we have a title, but we'd always just continue doing the same things we'd always done.
Yeah, just making that foundation stronger.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of puzzling. So how did you like start noticing that, wow, like you guys are on the same page, or this isn't really what it needs to be?
Yeah. So growing up, I had attended a church called Ridgecrest, and I knew that he had an association with a Methodist church nearby called Mount Sylvan. And so I always just kind of assumed that on Sunday mornings, I didn't see him at church. It was because he was at his church. Like it just never dawned on me that he might not have actually been attending church. But there's a few little like flags that probably should have gone up for me. Like one big one was when we got our senior yearbooks. They had these senior ads that they could buy to put in the back of the
senior salutes. That's what we call them.
Yes, that's what.
Yeah,
that's what they were. His church had bought one to congratulate the seniors from their church, and one of it included him in it. And I remember him laughing and being like, "I can't believe they would include me in the picture and stuff." And I was like, "Well, why wouldn't they? Like, you go to church there, right?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, kind of, but like, I just don't do anything with the youth group. Like, I don't go on Wednesday nights." And so I was like, "Oh, well, I mean,
okay,
but you're still there. Like, that's why they, like, you still come on Sundays. Like, that's why they included you in it." It didn't dawn on me that, like, maybe this is an indication that he really wasn't attending on Sundays either. Like, but it probably should have been a big flag to me at that point, you know? There's also other things. Like, I went on lots of mission trips, and I was in a singing group at college that was a Christian group. And like, he wasn't doing any of those things. But once again, like, that's okay. Not everybody does mission trips. That's fine.
Yeah,
and not
everybody can sing. So nobody's in there. Yeah.
Well, when I knew I would be going to Bible study, like, I never heard him say that he went to Bible study, or if we talked about what we had done that weekend and I shared about going and trying out a new church near campus or something, I never heard him saying the same things. Yeah. And so, you know, there weren't blatant flags, but I should have been seeing.
But there were some subtle things. Yeah. This sounds like one of those times where, you know, we've heard growing up in church or whatnot, like being unequally yoked. But that's kind of a weird phrase. So I'd like for us to camp out on that for a second. What is a yoke? You know? I like to hear from you, like, what your explanation of what unequally yoked is.
Yeah. So it's an old farming term. So unless you've spent any time around a farm, you may not be aware of what the yoke is. But
I mean, is it an egg?
Yeah. Different kind of yoke. Put in your mind the idea of like that Amish farmer pulling his plow behind 2 cows or 2 horses or 2 bulls or whatever it is that they're using. And there's this wooden piece that goes across both necks of the animal. That is the yoke. Okay. And what it does is it's something that they attach the machinery to the animals, but it allows it to be able to be moved at the same pace as the animals. Okay. So if you've got one animal that's going faster and pulling harder, but it's still attached to this slower animal, it's going to steer off of the path that they're walking on. But if both animals are walking at the same pace, in the same direction, it's going to pull that plow and create these nice even rows for the farmer to plant stuff on. And so if you're unequally yoked, you have someone that as fast as you might be moving, they're still attached to you. And so they're going to pull you off of your path. And so you're not going to get those nice even fields that a farmer wants.
And it's probably painful too. Can you imagine like someone going against you, like pulling you back a little bit in your neck there? Probably doesn't feel good either in that way.
No, it probably feels very restrictive.
So it's not part of an egg. Okay, thanks for clearing that up.
YOLK versus YOKE.
Yeah.
Different spelling, same pronunciation.
Yeah. So did that realization though, when you started realizing things about him, did that kind of shake you up?
It did. Like, there was definitely moments where I felt like, why are you making this statement? Like, what do you mean by you don't attend Wednesdays, but like, you're not telling me you're not attending on Sundays? What does that mean? Like, there was a lot of ways that I had questions, but I'd always be able to rationalize it. Like, okay, well, some people they have other things going on Wednesday nights. They're not involved in their Wednesday night youth group, or maybe their youth group's really cliquish and he just didn't fit with them, whatever it is. Yeah. that makes sense. And he's never told me he's not going on Sunday mornings to church. So I'm sure he's going on Sunday morning.
I mean, he's a good moral guy, right?
Yes, he knows all the stuff that Christians do, and morally he follows everything that we do. So yeah, he must be the same.
Yeah, it must be.
And he always supported me in everything. So like if I was in with my singing group at campus, it was a Christian group. If we had a performance, he'd come and be in the audience, and he'd bring me flowers to show support of the stuff. Really but he was never going to jump up there and sing with me. But once again, maybe he's just not a singer. Like I can always come up with some reason for why he's not involved. And, maybe he's not getting on the plane with me to go on this mission trip because he doesn't come to my church. And so he's not going to sign up to come with a different church. Like I could always come up with a reason for it, but it definitely would shake me up each time. Like I'd get these questions of like, why are you saying this? Like, why, what do you mean by this?
Or just like something's missing here. How come we can't share this experience together? Like something little amiss. Yeah. How long have you guys been dating at this point when you're starting to like have these reservations and like, Yeah.
So we dated for about 2.5 years before I really started like questioning what was going on here. So at this point was, my junior year of college, and where I was at in North Carolina, there was kind of this just general, when you graduate, you either went to master's programs or you got married. And so we were seeing a lot of people that were getting engaged either like at the end of their junior year, beginning of senior year, and then they were getting married like the summer after they graduated college. And so we're kind of getting to that point of like, are we going to be getting engaged? Are we not? I have some questions here, some lingering questions that I need to start dealing with, because now we're thinking of, he's not just my boyfriend. Like, is this going to be the person that I'm going to marry? And so it was really about that 2.5 year mark that I started really having the questions and really started wrestling with this idea. And I like went way too long with dealing with I wrestled with all this for about 9 months before ever making any kind of decision on it.
That's a really long time, Marianne. And like, I just know, man, the longest relationship I had been in before my husband was 1.5 years. And man, the longer you're in something, the harder it is to come out. So I can only imagine what it is to be invested that much, and not just him, but his family for that long. Like I know that decision was not easy for you to make at all.
No, definitely not.
Wow. Did you ever ask him about his faith or try to persuade him to see things like your way a little?
Yeah, I would try to ask in very subtle ways. Like I never just came out and asked, are you a Christian?
Yeah.
It was always in more subtle ways of like, okay, well, so have you found a church on campus yet? And it would be like, no, I haven't really found anything yet. I usually just go home. And so he kind of played off like, well, I'm going to my home church back at home when I'm there. And so I never really got very clear answers, but I'd always get enough of an answer to kind of have me drop it for a little bit. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I tried to ask, but I never did get blatant answers. And so I would try to like encourage him more, like, hey, I know there's this like group that we have friends with at NC State who are going to this like campus group that meets that I think you would be interested in. And I can't do it that night. I've got a lab that I have to do. Oh, okay. Well, know it's there. When you're done this semester, you could always go to this Christian group if you want to. I'm sure they'd love to have you. And we would always just kind of fall away. Like I'd try to encourage him, but I don't think he ever took any of that encouragement.
Yeah. I think sometimes did you feel like you're kind of getting to the rut of like missionary dating him, quote unquote? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a phrase or a term that's been used before. And I've been guilty of this myself. Like I've dated 2, maybe 3 people like this. And they all ended and they all didn't end well. And it's just a term that's like, you date someone in the hopes of them coming to the same faith as you, or that somehow you're going to bring them to the faith or whatnot. And I know for me, those are not positive experiences.
I even had a friend who, she was like a Sunday school teacher that I had growing up, but like her son I went to school with, like I knew her family really well. And she had been in something similar where when at the time that she and her husband got married, he was not a Christian. But through the course of their marriage, he ultimately became a Christian. And of course, she raised her kids that way and stuff. And so she'd always make it sound like it's okay. If he's not there yet, there's still plenty of time. You keep working on him. You keep encouraging him. You keep inviting him. They'll eventually come around. And it was like, I know what she was trying to do was that she was trying to rationalize that because it worked for her, it's okay. But not what you need to be telling a impressionable high school / college student that like, oh yeah, it's totally fine to go into a marriage with this guy who's not a Christian yet, because maybe one day down the road, maybe he'll come to know Christ.
Maybe all that headache and pressure for him and worry of him coming to Jesus will be worth it one day.
Yes.
I was like, yeah. I mean, and I think for some people, like if you were both non-believers and then came to Christ later and then you're in that situation, it's different. But if you're already like, a believer with Christ and committed to that, it doesn't make sense to put yourself in that kind of situation and that heartache. Because I feel like that's what you're signing yourself up for, is heartache for yourself, for them, and then eventually your children as well. So this doesn't really make sense for us. You're not going to flourish as well. Like you said, she probably was trying to rationalize at that point for herself. And I know for me too, like there was a situation I have with a guy. I just realized like, man, he would go get drunk a lot. And mine was a little bit opposite situation. Like, or I was okay with him going out and do what he needed to do as long as I wasn't there with that. So I'm not going to be a part of that. You do that. But it got kind of weird because he would go get drunk and do something stupid and then feel the need to confess it to me. And I was just like, this is weird. Like, you're confessing to the wrong person. Not that I don't care, but it's just like I was having to compromise what I believed in and that he wasn't really growing with that. And it was a bad deal. And at that same time, or a little bit later, I had a youth director give this agile, good Baptist word there about the whole elevator situation. Friends, relationships are like elevators. Then you bring you up, bring you down. And I was like, that was definitely stuck in my mind from then on. Like, yep, that's.
Oh, if you grew up in church, you've probably seen your youth director standing on the chair at some point and doing the demonstration of how easy is it for them to pull me down off this chair than you to pull me up.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And but it's still a hard thing, especially when you're already invested in one like that. So when did it become clear that things really needed to, like you're saying, you're kind of suspicious, trying to figure him out, feel him out where he's at. But when did you know that this has just got to end?
Yeah. So I had started having those questions, and I had started praying through this with God as to what I need to be doing. It was already kind of stirring in my heart that I needed to end this relationship. But I really had two moments that solidified it for me. One of them was I had been invited to be a leader for a D Now type week, discipleship now, which I was going to be teaching middle school girls. There was one other college leader that was going to be with me. And this one particular lesson I was supposed to teach them was about this idea of being unequally yoked. And I felt like, I don't think in good conscience I can teach this to them, because I am clearly not living this out. Like, how am I supposed to tell them, you're not supposed to do this when I'm clearly doing it? Yeah. And so I think I faked like I had a migraine or something that night so that I could get the other leader to teach that particular lesson, because I just did not have it in me. And I even went to bed crying that night about the fact that I can't teach middle schoolers not to do this because I'm doing it. That's wrong. I can't be doing something that's against what the Bible is telling me I should be doing. Yeah. So that really got that stirring going.
Yeah. And there's nothing like God's word to really convict you and move you.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And it was convicting me in that moment. Yeah. But it really got bad. One day I went to his house and I had a conversation with his mom. I went to go see him. And when I walked in through their kitchen, she was in there and she stopped me before he even knew I was in the house. To this day, he has no idea she and I had this conversation. But she started telling me about how she was so grateful for my relationship with her son, because she felt like it was the thing that was finally going to bring him back to God. And she started sharing about how when they first got married, she and her husband both went to church together, but he was an engineer, which is exactly what Al was also studying to be. And he had a hard time logically understanding how God could be who he says he is. You know, God, how did God create? How did God do these things? How did God actually come back from the grave? Like if he couldn't scientifically rationalize it out, it was hard for him to believe in it. It was just that engineering mind that he had. And so she told me about how her husband would start with the whole, like, you know, I don't feel like I can go this Sunday. I've got so much work I need to catch up on. Y'all go, that kind of thing. Or he wasn't feeling good and wouldn't go. And so the more excuses he made, the less she pushed it. And so eventually got to this point where he didn't have to give her an excuse. He just wasn't going to go with her. And so she would get up on Sunday mornings and take the kids with her. And then it got to the point where the kids started asking, well, why do we have to go? And Daddy doesn't have to go.
Yeah.
And so she started, well, you know, I want you to go because you want to go. So I'm not going to push you to go. And so she didn't force it on them. And so they ultimately stopped going as well, which cleared up a lot of the questions that I had about Al and the whole youth group thing. Okay, now it makes sense. He's not actually going because he wasn't being forced to go. And so she had been praying for a long time that her kids and her husband would come to know Christ and would come back to the church with her. But at this point in her life, she was going on her own every Sunday. And I remember her telling me all this, like she's trying to encourage me that I'm being a great influence on her son. And instead I'm like, looking at her thinking, this is going to be my life.
Yeah.
This is going to be my life. Like Al is the same boat as his dad. He's got that engineering mind. Like, what if he never believes this? What if he doesn't ever get to the point where he understands it? Am I going to be that mom that is going to church on her own, taking my kids? And if they start asking those questions, am I going to give them the opportunity not to come? Is that going to be an option that I have to give to my children? And will I be praying that one day they meet somebody that will instead bring them to know him because I couldn't help them get there on my own? And it was like mortifying to me. Like I actually ended up feeling so nauseous after that conversation. Like I don't think I even stayed long at his house because I just was not feeling good after that conversation.
Yeah.
Because it was like God had just given me a glimpse of what a future marriage with him was going to look like.
Yeah.
So that was the point. I actually had that conversation, and then like a couple of days later, I left to go on a mission trip to Alaska. And I just decided like, that was it. I can't do this anymore. I have to end this. And during that mission trip, like God spoke to me so clearly and gave me such a peace about moving forward with this idea that when we got home, that was when I broke up with him.
Oh man. Wow. So what were some of those things that were going through in your mind other than what you just said, like, you know, the conversation with mom and whatever? Were there some other conversations you were having with God, or like, were there other people around you? Like, what were some things that, you know, really convicted and really solidified that this is your decision?
Well, so during that time, I had been praying like from the beginning, like, Lord, if this is what you want, if this is not going to be the relationship that we need to have, I'm going to need you to put something really big in our way that gives us a really big reason to break up. Because I don't know if you had this scenario, Brandy, but when I was in school, there was lots of friends that had breakups because I just feel like God's telling me we're not supposed to be together stuff. And then like 2 weeks later, that person would be dating somebody else. Like they would just use, they would just use God as the excuse for being able to get out of it. And although God was my reason for getting out of this one, like I didn't want to be that person. Yeah. Okay. I didn't want to be using my faith as the reason, just because it had such a bad connotation with it to begin with. So instead I was like, Lord, just give me a really good reason. Like, let him cheat on me. I would be okay with him cheating on me right now. Like that would be okay with me because that would be a great reason to break up with him.
Yeah, give me less guilt. Give me easy way out.
I mean, he treated me so well. I had zero reason to end this. So Lord, give me one of the worldly reasons for breaking up with them. You know, let him be demeaning towards me. Let him yell at me one time really good. And then I could be like, nope, I'm out. Done. But no, like God would not give any of those situations. He was going to, like, Al was a perfect saint. He was not going to have Al do anything that would be a worldly reason to break up with him, because God wanted me to be obedient to the, like, his spiritual reason of God is the most important thing in my life. I need to follow through with that. I needed to take that obedience because it really is because of my relationship with Christ that I can't see a future with you.
And really, just hearing it, from this side on the hindsight, it just seems like God was really wanting to declare, him as supreme in your life. Like he wanted you to make a public, declaration that God is my everything. And that's what he was asking you to do. So it really feels like that's the only way you could do it is if you had to do the breakup. It couldn't be him. It couldn't be no other way. Because not only did you have to make that declaration like that for your own self, but that's really how God was going to get the glory in this and with him.
I mean, ultimately, when we shared this story later, we were going to have to say that the reason we broke up was because of my relationship with Christ. Like I knew that there was no other reason that we were going to be able to give for that because that was the reason and God was calling me to obedience in that.
Yeah. Oh, still tough though. Still tough. Growing pains right there.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But were there any doubts during that time? I mean, did you have other people throwing some shade or just didn't understand? And how did you deal with that?
Well, so I had a group of good girlfriends that I hung out with. And like two of them, they had never really had a relationship with a guy. Like one person had dated somebody for a short period. One had never really dated anybody at all. And so both of them were like, what are you doing? Y'all have been together this long. Like y'all are going to get married. You've got a great relationship. Why would you throw all that away? Like they just didn't quite understand what I was doing. Yeah. But one of my friends that I've actually become closer to on this trip to Alaska, he was a guy, but we never dated. It was never one of those like, this is my rebound kind of guy. Like, no, nothing like that. But he was just very honest with me. And so when we would talk about it on that trip, like, this is what I'm thinking, I'm going to end it when we get home. He was like, why have you not done this before? Like, why did you not break up with them back when we did the D-Now stuff? And I was like, I don't know. Like, it
was hard. That's why.
I would try to rationalize it. And he was just that honest friend that would look at me and be like, why did you let it get this far? How did you not follow through with what God was asking you to do earlier? And so he was a great reality check for me that like, I am definitely living in disobedience. And I'm not the only one that sees that now. Like other people can see the disobedience in my life.
Yeah. Wow. So you came up from Alaska. You had that hard conversation. What was that like with Al? Like, how did he take that?
Yeah. So came back and I actually ended up going to see him at his house. It was a couple of days after. Like I didn't like get off the plane and do it right there in the airport. Like it was a couple of days later. But I remember sitting in his living room. Like his dad had this chair that kind of overlooked the whole living room area. And so I sat in the dad's chair, like looking at him across on the couch and just laid it all out for him. And I was very clear with the fact that, like, if I'm going to call myself a Christian and I'm going to say that God is the most important relationship in my life, I need to be able to share that with the most important person in my life. Yeah. And in that case, at that time, that was him. Like, if he was going to be my husband, I needed to be able to share that with my husband. And I couldn't. Yeah. And that was a problem to me. Like, if I can't share the most important thing in my life with the most important person in my life, something's not adding up here. And so I knew I needed to end it so that I could find that godly husband that God was calling me to. He didn't take it well. I mean, he, as a non-Christian, he didn't understand the purpose. And so he kept kind of asking me, like, have I done something wrong? Have I done something to make you not want to be with me? And I was like, no, you've done nothing. Like, let me encourage you. Like, you've been an amazing boyfriend to me. You've treated me so well. You've been the sweetest thing. Like, I have zero qualms with you and our relationship, but I can't share God with you. And that's a problem for me. Yeah. And so he went the route of, well, maybe we just need a break. Let's take a 2-week break, separate from each other, and just see if this is really. You're
on this emotional high from this, mission trip. Surely she'll calm down afterwards. Whatever.
But like thinking maybe some time away from him would make me realize how much I really wanted to be with him. And I didn't want to do it because I have spent 9 months wrestling with this decision. I was done with this. Let's move on. But if he needed that for him, I was willing to give that to him. So we went on this 2-week break, which now that doesn't seem like it was a big deal. But at the time, like, it just felt like I was further delaying the disobedience. Like, I did not want to have to do that in 2 weeks. But if that's what he needed, I was willing to do it.
Okay. Yeah.
So we came back after 2 weeks. I met him at his house, sat down, same setup. And I told him, look, my decision has not changed. Like, I still feel like we are not meant to be married to each other. We need to end this now. And he was like, well, what if I told you that in the last 2 weeks, I've been meeting with your pastor. We've been talking through all this, and I'm actually getting baptized this weekend. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, I'm excited for you to have finally gone somewhere with your faith, to have talked to somebody about it, and that you're getting baptized. That's amazing. But how do I know that you're not doing this just because you think it's going to keep me?
Yeah.
Like, that you're
just really sincere.
I want you to have a relationship with Christ because you recognize that you are a sinner and that you need a savior, and God can do that for you. And that baptism is just an outward sign of that inward belief. Not that you're doing all this because I'm now a Christian, Marianne's going to stay with me.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, like, I totally get it. You know, Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and I believe in that. Like, he tried his best to tell me that, no, he was doing this for the right reasons. He's had multiple conversations with my pastor, and he really felt like God was calling him to himself, and he was getting baptized. And I was like, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. But even if you are starting out in your Christian walk today, where I'm at in my Christian walk, we are still so far apart that I still can't do this. Like, we're still not going to be walking the same path together at the same time. He actually did. That was a Friday night. We ended it Sunday. He showed up at my church and was baptized. His whole family was in attendance. I was there to cheer him on. And that was the last time that I was ever physically in a room with him. So he did go through with the baptism. But to this day, I still have had questions of whether or not he did it because of him or if he did it because of me.
Yeah. And the whole thing was like coming to Christ too. It's so much more than believing all the things. It's so much more than saying that, yeah, I believe God's God and that Jesus did this. And I mean, yes, acknowledging those things and believing those things that is what brings you to Christ. But as far as being a Christian and living the life and, you know, being where you and him can equally yoked, it's also surrendering to that relationship and being a part and yearning for a growing relationship with God. And I mean, just from what you're saying from that point, I'm not sure he was there yet.
Yeah, like, I don't think he ever understood the whole idea that there had to be a relationship. Like the waters didn't save him, but there was a further relationship with Christ.
The water's just water. It's not holy. Yeah.
And I think that had always been the hardest thing, was just knowing that he probably never fully understood why it was that I was breaking up with him. Yeah. Unless he had gotten to that point in his relationship with Christ to understand it. But he was still going to be so young in his faith that I was still going to be the villain here.
At that point too. Yeah. I mean, that is sad to hear now. And I know that was probably really hard in that moment to know and feel that. But on the flip side, this is biblical and it's true. Just knowing that you and I as people, like, we're not the ones that save people. Yeah. And God is always pursuing us. Like, God was totally pursuing you during this whole time. And we have to know and trust in the fact and in the truth that God was also pursuing Al. And maybe to this day, and, you know, and rest in that.
I've just always been grateful that at least he had his mom who understood kind of where I was at, that maybe she could further help him to understand. Help guide him in that way.
You know, at the very least, that you did your, you know, quote unquote Christian duty, because all we really are called to do is to live out that example, to share the gospel with other people and live obedient to him. And you definitely did those things. I mean, the gospel was shared. We were obedient to Christ, even to the point where it led you to having to break up with him. I mean, if anything, it definitely shows, like, for you, it was more than just checking off a box of attendance and hanging out with a certain group and singing some songs. it really was something for you. It really was a relationship, so much so that it was a very important relationship to you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that's all we can do as believers.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that you would say that you learned about God's character during this season?
How steadfast God is. He was so incredibly patient with me during the whole process. Like, I feel like if he had the human quality of it, he would have just been like, you know what? I've told you, I've been trying to tell you, I've put all these situations in front of you, and you still aren't following me. There's no hope for you. I'm just throwing my hands up and being done with it. Like, you can't say it's not, if you have a bad marriage, it's not because I didn't warn you. But no, like, God was not that way. He was just so steadfast in his pursuit of me that he continually put moments in my path to make me question if this is what we should have been doing. You know, those nighttime prayers, those nighttime times where like the stirring was in my heart of, am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? Like, those were persistent. Going to that D now and having that be a lesson on being unequally yoked.
For middle schoolers.
For middle schoolers, exactly. Yeah. Like, that was big. Like, that was a God moment. Yeah. Having his mom we've been dating for 3.5 years at this point, to finally have that conversation with me about what her life looked like being unequally yoked with her husband. I needed that to see. Yeah. It's not as great as my friend had told me. Like, sometimes husbands don't come to know Christ because of your relationship. I needed someone to say that to me and me to see it and see what that impact would be on my children. Yeah. But God was so steadfast in it. He just patiently kept putting those moments in front of me, and he just waited until I had been obedient to finally make it happen. Yeah. And I have to say, even for myself, like, that is the thing that moves me still today as a Christian, just how much God pursues me still. Yeah. Like, it wasn't like he pursued me once I, surrendered to him. He continually pursues me, and it gets me every time. I get all emotional about it, or really, especially at Easter. I get really emotional around Easter. Yeah. I really do. And it also just makes me think of the song that came out a few years ago, several years ago, actually. It's like, "Oh, How He Loves Us." And here's a few of the lyrics to it. It's like, his love is like a hurricane, and I just don't have the time to maintain these regrets when I think about the way, oh, how he loves us. That line right there is just enough. Like, wow, like, he loves me so much. Even these regrets, even with your situation where you might have regretted, oh man, I wasted all this time, or like, why didn't I do that sooner? It's okay. And he's still pursuing me. And we know that, he's still pursuing Al, Yeah. And that's what makes it so wow. Oh, how great that his love really is. And yeah. And that's what's special about being in our relationship with God, something like that. Absolutely. Yeah. So now we're on the other side, we've had this big moment, or you have. What would you tell someone that's struggling with a similar situation? When it comes to marriage, or it comes with any relationship, there's only two ways it can end. If you're dating someone, you will either get married to them or you will break up with them. There is no other in between. Yep. And so unless you're planning on marrying this person, you are only setting yourself up for heartbreak. And so always look at it with that mindset of, is this somebody that I can marry? And if it's not, do not hesitate in being willing to walk away from a good thing, because God's got something even better lined up for you. But not just that, it's that idea of obedience. Right now, I'm leading a study with our ladies at church that's called From Garden to Glory by Courtney Doctor. And we've been looking at the creation portion of the story of this, God being the ultimate narrative of the Bible. Like the whole Bible is trying to point us to God. But what is the creation story telling us about who God is? And in the creation story, even before the fall, obedience was something that was a requirement of that loving relationship with God. And so when he commanded something to do it, they did it. Like, God commanded the oceans to do whatever, and it was so. And God commanded the animals to do something, and it was so. And so you see this obedience even from the beginning. And so to have that ultimate personal relationship with Christ, we have to have obedience. It's been the plan of his from the beginning. If we're not being called to obedience because we're sinners. We're being called to obedience because God created us for that purpose. Mm-hmm. And so we have to stick with that idea of like, obey what he's calling you to do, obey what his scripture are informing us to do, and keep pursuing him because God's not going to stop pursuing you.
Yeah, definitely. That's some really good stuff, Marianne. I really hope that whoever needs to listen to that today really took that to heart. And I'm so glad you're able to share that with me this morning. And I really enjoyed our conversation.
Oh, well, thank you for letting me come and do this. It was definitely a messy situation at the time, and it was one that was hard to do, but I'm grateful if even somebody hears it and is inspired to understand that, like, it is only through true obedience that we can continue to grow in our faith.
For sure. And I'm sure that today people have heard that, wow, like following God and, just following where he leads us and being obedient to him is very, very important and super important to our lives.
Yeah. And if I can just add one thing, I would say, once I followed through with that obedience, God provided me with so much peace about what had happened. Like, I literally walked out of his house and went fishing with friends. Like, I did not cry about it. I didn't feel regret for what had happened. Like, I knew that following in that obedience was the thing that I was supposed to have done. And once I did it, man, that weight that had just come off of my shoulders, like, it was so freeing to be done with it. Not because I was done with the relationship, but because I had just finally followed through with what God had been asking me to do. And so there is peace in that. When you follow in God's obedience and you follow what he is asking you to do, there is peace that can be found through it.
Yes. And I'm so glad you're able to experience that and have that. And that's definitely a truth, something I've experienced as well in my own life. So thank you once again for coming, for being a part of this morning.
You are so welcome. Like I said, thank you for letting me share what God has done in my life. My name is Marianne, and this is my story of the middle.
And thanks for listening. I'm your host, Brandy Bostic, and you've been listening to the Up from the Muck podcast.
Psalm 40, verse 2. He brought me up from a desolate pit, out of the muddy clay, and set my feet on a rock, making my steps secure.